like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999 from the saddest burlesque in Baltimore here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Neibart.
And I'm Phil Iskov.
And with us today is our senior Jewish correspondent, Toby Herman. Toby, welcome back to Talk More Jews with us.
Shalom.
I suppose you are our Jewish and canine correspondent. There were no Jews in. I mean, unless
I don't think there were any Jews in Turner and Hooch, right?
Hooch might have been Sephardic. I'm not sure, but definitely not Ashkenazi.
Do you guys hear that? We are losing listeners.
Oh.
Are you saying our listeners are anti-Semites? I don't think so, Toby. I think they're very excited to sit. But that's actually something that I'm interested in. A perfect segue into one of the first topics I wanted to talk about.
Okay.
Liberty Heights, 1999 film directed by Barry Levinson, the fourth of his tetralogy about Baltimore. Started with Diner, Tin Men, Avalon, and then this. I believe that was.
Will we get a fifth? Do you think we get a fifth?
I think he will die first, but it's possible that Sam Levinson may make a fifth.
He might take the torch.
He might take over the Jew torch.
Yeah.
Jew torch. But three Jews. You can make whatever jokes you want. But he made four films about Jews in Baltimore, about his specific upbringing. And I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about is how weird it must be for non-Jews to have all of this Jewish content presented to you by major studios with big budgets and high production values when you're not Jewish. You see what I'm saying? It's like we spent so much time, and a lot of these films, rightfully so, are about how Jews are marginalized. They take place in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. I think all but Diner are in one way or another about how Jews are marginalized, but they certainly don't seem marginalized in Hollywood. And I'm not trying to make some point about, how Jews are prominent in Hollywood. It's obvious to anybody who, knows the history of Hollywood dating back to almost its inception, the way Jews have run, studio after studio after studio. But that must be weird for other people in the country when Jews are 2 to 3% of this country, and yet Jewish stories have been so prominent in film history.
I mean, I certainly, it did kind of occur to me as I was watching these four films, how kind of crazy it is that he got to make these under the studio system. I mean, these are admittedly like relatively lower budget movies, although they are period films, so they do cost money. But I don't know that it's as, I guess my overarching feeling is that the majority of films made out of Hollywood are about white people, just Caucasian, non-Jewish people, that I think that perhaps we're more attuned to the fact that these films exist than they are.
I agree. I think a truly Jewish film, like a film that's Jewish in its DNA, is the exception. It's a little more rare than I think what you're saying, Kenny.
We do get a fair amount of Holocaust films, which I imagine, that's sort of its own thing. But and again, I'm not sitting here saying that because, quote unquote, that a lot of prominent Jewish people run Hollywood, that there aren't a fair amount of films made about that subject matter. I just don't know that. I just wonder whether or not we're clocking it because of our heritage more so than
probably. And maybe it's too early to get into this, but I think only 2 of these movies are completely Jewish films.
Sure.
The last two. Yes, I agree with that.
Yes.
You're right. Tin Men characters aren't even Jewish as far as I can tell.
Mm-mm.
So that's not, and if they
Diner,
are,
there definitely are Jews, but it's not about that. They just
well, they're Jews, the Jewish wedding at the end, but no, it's not
That's
about
true.
that.
Oh, that's true.
And it does kind of contradict the lessons of Avalon in a weird way. It's only it takes and Liberty Heights for that matter. It's a weird contradiction that all these movies take place in the same area. Yeah. And Liberty Heights is kind of explicitly about marginalization of Jews, whereas Diner, which takes place 4 years, prior, has almost no mention of that. Yet they're going to the same diner, which I love, which is fine. The experience doesn't have to be monolithic, and Jews, like anyone else, contain multitudes. Sometimes we just go to diners to talk about the cults. So, but I do think that compared to our percentage of the population, Jews are overrepresented in film and television. I just think that does speak to the universality of human experience, that a show like Seinfeld, which is not an overtly Jewish show, but it's obviously about written by two Jewish people and playing on a lot of Jewish humor, as is so much Mel Brooks and so much of our humor, the Reiners, et cetera, et cetera. I think it does say something that the Jewish experience has a universality, but also has been, I really do believe, given more of an opportunity to be seen in mainstream popular culture than most other minorities or ethnic minorities.
I do wonder whether or not, and you mentioned it just a second ago, but the prevalence or the success of Jewish comedians to some degree or another, I imagine, has something to do with that as well, right? I mean, like when a Mel Brooks and a Carl Reiner and whoever else you want to
Woody
kind of put into that
Allen
club, Woody Allen, sure. The amount of sort of successful Jewish comedians to some degree or another, I think probably fuels that too, right? Because when that humor breaks through and other people feel like, I mean, as you just said, like Seinfeld's another example of that as well, right? I mean, it's there is a cadence, there's a certain kind of, however you want to call it, descriptors in, yes, sure.
Even a non-denominational show like Friends is centered around Jewish characters.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of this is write what you know and think about.
Sure.
I'm 100% serious. There's so many
too.
Jewish writers. And I mean, one far end of the spectrum is like a Neil Simon, who just innately tells Jewish stories.
Sure.
And then there's someone like Barry Levinson, who worked his way to telling more Jewish stories. But I also think, like,
or a Mike
Avalon,
Nichols.
yes. And, like Avalon, for example, I think it is absolutely a Jewish film, but it's also just about the American immigrant experience. And so I would imagine that, people from other ethnicities would watch that and still catch glimpses of their own family.
Sure. That was the My Big Fat Greek Wedding thing, right? Mm-hmm. The argument about my Big Fat Greek Wedding thing was, this is everybody's family. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the point. I think what happened though, over the, up until My Big Fat Greek Wedding to some extent, was they were your typical white families, your typical waspy families, who, certainly were put on a pedestal above everyone else, and as the classic American family. And then Jews and Italians and Irish people were also given some opportunity to have their stories told. And beyond that, Black filmmakers can tell Black stories. And that's kind of the end of it, right?
I think that's why a movie like Minari stands out right now, outside of, the whole pandemic and what have you. But like, that's a film also about the, the Asian immigrant experience in a way that, in Arkansas, like it's just a very sort of, which is,
I think Minari is actually the most revolutionary of the films we have this year, because it's, as Phil, you and I were texting about this morning, but it's well-worn ground to tell historical stories like Judas and the Black Messiah, even about historical figures, have been controversial. Malcolm X was 30 years ago. Like this is something that filmmakers of color have been doing for years and years to a level of acclaim. To tell a uniquely American immigrant story from a perspective that's not white has actually never broken through like this. Whereas these stories about the childhoods of white filmmakers have been breaking through forever and ever and ever. They often make great movies. Like I think these 4 movies, certainly, to cut through the bullshit, I think these 4 movies looked at as a tetralogy are pretty incredible. Like I think it's an incredible, montage of a person's life and a culture's life and a snapshot of America at a certain point in time, a really important point in history. But what's weird, and I was looking at this, is we haven't seen a lot of this. I'm going to tell the story of my childhood from filmmakers around our ages. And I was wondering, is that because the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s are not as evocative? Is that because the internet has made it so those don't feel so far away anymore? Or has it been that like those stories have been told to death by white people and people of color have been marginalized until this point? So still are. I'm not to say it's over, but
I think our people of our generation, or right above or right below, I think they have found a different way to tell the stories. Like the first thing that popped in my mind was Freaks and Geeks. Like that is of its moment. It is absolutely about the time that it was set. And I think a lot of that comes out of Judd Apatow's history, his personal history. And
that was 20 years ago.
So what are you saying? You're talking about millennials making films?
I'm talking about movies. No, I'm talking about movies that are being made now. I'm talking about movies. If you were to make Avalon right now, you would be setting Avalon in the mid 90s,
which I think is, I mean,
or maybe the mid 80s for Avalon, or in the mid 90s for Tin Men. It would be it would be like an 85 to a 95 period, where you would set those movies about your parents and grandparents.
I think that the 90s feel like, I don't know if you guys saw this. There was a documentary that the actress who plays Punky Brewster put up on Hulu this weekend called Kid 90.
Kid 90, yeah.
Which I quite liked. I feel as though the idea of sort of the adolescent 90s experience might not be distilled into, and this I think answers your question, Kenny, in terms of like whether or not television shows or various other types of media are the way that those boxes are going to get checked, rather than making a film or a tetralogy, whatever the case might be. I think also, we all know about the death of the mid-tier movie, and all 4 of these films fall pretty squarely in that box of a sort of $20 to $40 million, what have you. A little less. Liberty Heights only had a budget of 11, but still, like I think that movie just doesn't exist outside of Annapurna or an A24, and I don't know whether or not those places are interested in that type of movie.
Jonah Hill tried, right? So Jonah Hill made mid-90s, and he certainly tried to do this thing, and I don't think it was a successful movie, really, but I see what he was trying to do, and I give him credit for trying to do it. I think it comes down to a couple of things. The boomers really bought into their own shit in a way that's kind of hard. In a way that's kind of hard to believe. Like that they really thought that they were special, angels, and every story from their lives was worth telling. Gen X,
the Wonder Years effect. Yeah.
Yes.
Forrest Gump effect.
Forrest Gump, Wonder Years. I mean, we could talk about these movies too. The movies we're talking about today. Gen X basically decided it's all stupid, and fuck it, we're like, this is the dumbest shit in the world. And now, and so there is that kind of lost art of the the loosely told autobiographical story. Yeah. And my sense is that Gen X is embarrassed to do it. Like I do feel like, I'm not Gen X, the millennials. I feel like they'd want to. because we're a sentimental generation. I, considering myself to be kind of an old millennial, I guess we're a sentimental generation, nostalgic generation, but we're also kind of embarrassed by the idea of telling stories about ourselves. And that, I think, is a real thing right now. I think particularly, not particularly among whites, particularly among Jews. I think that there is like a shame about writing that story. And by the way, not completely ridiculous to be shamed about that.
But I would argue that the generation after us has no shame, and they're on the other side of this.
You don't know yet.
I mean, like if you look at shows like Girls or Generation or what have you, there's no shortage of sort of teen shows that are willing to kind of embrace every sort of element of the spectrum. I don't think that they're worried about
that. That's different. That's telling stories about their lives right now. Like that is them finding that. That's what I said. You don't know yet. That's them finding their ways in real time, which every generation is going to do. Every group of artists is going to do.
You're talking about looking back as
I get that.
I'm talking. Yes, every group of people, every person is going to say my life is a movie at some point. You have to almost. It usually is the first thing you write. And then once you've matured as an artist, Lena Dunham is going to do something else, and it's going to be interesting. And I wonder.
I have no doubt.
Yeah. I mean, I know she's an EP on Generation, but I wonder what it is when she's like says, "Okay, this is my next kind of big thing that's about me in a different way."
I just think that generation, the generation that invented selfies, they're going to look back at themselves. Do you know what I mean?
Like TikTok.
But I mean, I just think they haven't had enough time to live enough to warrant looking back yet.
I don't know. They didn't. They took the selfies at the time. So
maybe.
I'm not. I don't mean to be contrarian. I just don't know. I do think that there is, for instance, the high school reunion effect, where high school reunions don't mean what they used to because everyone's following each other on Facebook and Instagram. I know the 250 kids in my grade, I pretty much know what 220 are doing, how many kids they have, where they live, who they're married to, et cetera, et cetera. I did not expect that to be the case when I was graduating high school. I thought I wouldn't see these people for the next 10 or 20 years, and we'd get together and we'd reminisce. But we did that, and I talked to half these people within the last 5 years. So I think that I don't know what it means, but I do think that it has affected this kind of period piece in my opinion, a negative way, because I would like to see what the period we're talking about, 1999, this turn of the millennium, pre and post 9/11, we should be fucking figuring out what that did to us. And we are not.
Well, we're not doing it in I think we might be doing it subtextually to some degree or another. You know what I mean? Like, I think you and I both agree that, that 25th Hour is one of the best 9/11 movies. It's not really about 9/11.
That was only a couple years later.
Sure. So I do wonder whether or not there is some processing going on to some degree or another. I also think that in terms of like writing movies about yourself, or sort of trying to, I can't help but think of Malcolm and Marie a little bit here, because not just because Sam Levinson is Barry's son, but also because that one of the big things that film was kind of dinged with was this idea of the sort of navel gazing component of him using this as an opportunity to be able to complain about critics and how they view his work and stuff like that. Like, I think that people are now just sort of metatextually dealing with these things rather than sort of like overtly making a movie about their autobiographical, what have you. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I'll throw out one other thing that I think is real and bad. Barry Levinson grew up the son of working class immigrants, or second generation immigrants, in a major American city right around World War II, as the country was, having all these massive economic and social changes. Most of the filmmakers from that period, we know most of their biographies came from a similar background. somewhat lower class dreamers, technicians. We know that if you want to be successful in Hollywood today, you could be a genius, or you could be someone who can hang out and have your parents subsidize your life for a while you figure it out.
Yeah.
And I don't mean this as a judgment. I just mean that, like, people might be a little embarrassed to tell that story. I think Sam Levinson would be a little embarrassed. The
nepotism story?
To tell the real story of his life. Yes.
Yeah.
I think Sam Levinson, if he was to, sit down and be like, all right, let's talk about how, like, what really happened to me to get here and what my life was like. Even Jonah Hill, who God love him, did the best he can. He wrote a quote unquote autobiographical story about a kid living with a single mother in a one-room apartment. That's not who Jonah Hill was. I know where Jonah Hill went to high school. There's no
equivalent struggle in that story.
For sure.
There isn't, but like I dare somebody.
I'd watch the hell out of Sofia Coppola's.
That's what I'm saying. I dare somebody to tell the story of what it actually feels like. Sofia Coppola.
That's interesting.
Has never. There's no question that she hasn't had an easy road. It's hard being a female filmmaker in Hollywood who fucking was in a movie when she was like 17 and a national laughingstock
and eviscerated for it. Yeah.
There's certainly a story there that these people can tell. They're just too embarrassed to tell it. And that's why all the love in the world to fucking Lena Dunham, who had the guts to tell the real story.
Sure. I agree with all of that. I think that, it's interesting when you, as you were talking about Levinson and his upbringing, and I think why these films are so interesting. Watching them all in sequence was really kind of fascinating as well. Just really feeling the unity of them and the sort of the package of them, I thought was really fascinating. But it also, Kenny, you mentioned this idea of the times with which they grew up, right? I mean, I know the boomers obviously drink their own Kool-Aid, but they also really were living in a pretty seismic time, where seismic shifts were happening in this country. Not to take anything away from that. What I like is that these films, for the most part, Liberty Heights might be the least elegant of the four, deal with those issues in ways that I think is relatively subtle, all things considered. Like, these movies don't feel like sledgehammers. They really do feel like sort of lived-in character pieces, which is, again, a testament to how special it is that they were made and kind of crazy that they were made.
I think it's interesting that he built the most volatile one, that was the last one,
yes.
And I also think it's really interesting. I would imagine, he makes Diner, and he's nostalgic for his youth. So he writes about his youth. I don't know where Tin Man falls into all this, but then you go to Avalon and he's older and reflecting more on his familial experience. Mm-hmm. And then you get Liberty Heights, which is like the most electric as far as talking about religion and race, and to a point that's not what he experienced. I mean, that is probably based on aspects of reality, but that wasn't his life, necessarily.
Sure. So, I think it's, I just want to step back for a quick second here, just because I think it's worth noting the sort of the Levinson arc, if you will, or where, because like Diner's his first film, and it feels like a first film, but it was also not the film he wanted to make first. The first movie he wanted to make was Toys, which is absolutely insane. That was the movie that he wanted to try to make first. I don't know who told him, and I should know this, but I don't know. Someone told him within the industry, said, this should not be your first film. You should make something small, something character piece, something that feels like you, like tell us your. So he makes Diner, which is the obvious kind of inflection point in terms of like where his life, where he felt like, his American Graffiti, his whatever you want to call it, right? So it obviously does quite well, and it opens a bunch of doors for him. It's really Good Morning Vietnam that really kind of like blows the doors open for him. And the success of that film allows him to make, Rain Man and Bugsy and Toys. And ultimately he gets to make Toys. And which is the sorest of thumbs in his filmography. It's truly an insane movie. That it exists.
One of the worst films ever made, but
I don't agree. I
know
like
you
toys.
don't. I don't even understand it. I don't even understand the logic of it.
But all that being said, I just think it's looking at Levinson's career over the course of these films and just kind of trying to get a macro sense of the choices he made, because his career, for all intents and purposes, kind of falls off a cliff. I mean, it really sort of, this is kind of the last movie of note that he makes, really. Before he makes a string of movies that ultimately don't really exist.
Well, but then he kind of found his footing with these HBO movies that everyone watches.
Yes, 100%. Sorry, that and you're absolutely correct. The Paterno and the Bernie Madoff thing, both of those are great. And I'm actually legitimately curious to see what this Godfather making of thing that he's doing is going to turn out like, because it could be great. But what I think is interesting is, I don't know that Liberty Heights was, I guess the question I have is, it feels like he makes these three films, right? He makes Diner, he makes Tin Men, and Avalon. From all accounts, it sounds like Liberty Heights came out of all things, it seemed like an anti-Semitic criticism of Sphere. There was a critic that was saying that Dustin Hoffman was the wrong character or the wrong actor to play this role, and in a sort of roundabout way made it sound as though it had something to do with the way he looks or whatever the case may be, his Jewish vibe. That apparently sparked something in Levinson that made him want to go and write Liberty Heights. So Liberty Heights feels like sort of the epilogue or perhaps the fourth film that he never maybe really thought about making. That's not to take anything away from Liberty Heights, but I do think it's an interesting.
So it's more of a response song.
It feels that way to me. Yeah. And again, I don't want to project. I don't know any of this for a fact. None of these are facts. This is just my assessment of what I've read. But it feels like that sort of hit a nerve for him that took him back to a time when perhaps he anti-Semitism was much more prominent to him. The anti-Semitism you don't feel anti-Semitism in the first three films, really. I mean, I didn't. I don't know if you guys did.
No, you don't.
Right.
And even in the fourth film, it's restrained.
Sure.
I bought it. I really did. I really bought it in a way that, like, you kind of have to strain in a movie like School Ties and say, is that really what it was like? Maybe that's what it was like, but that's so overt, and I don't know if I believe that. Like, this subtle, creeping anti-Semitism throughout Liberty Heights, that's what it felt like. That's what I think it felt like. I mean, your parents obviously grew up in Canada, right, Phil? But Toby, your parents did they grow up in New Jersey?
My father did, and my mom grew up in Massachusetts.
So similar stuff, right? My parents grew up in New Jersey, in South Orange, and in Springfield.
West Orange.
There you go, the Oranges. and all those towns were very, kind of ethnically diverse. And I do think everyone kind of had their own pockets, but when they went to high school or when they went to, town and whatever, everyone mixed and for the most part, I mean, there was certainly strife, but for the most part, it wasn't this overt, crystal knock shit that you're kind of led to believe in a movie like School Ties, which I like, which I'm sure existed here or there. But for the most part, I think it was this like, don't date our girls. Are you a Jew? What are you doing at our parties? Stay to your side of Liberty Heights, that kind of shit. And it rang very true. I really liked Liberty Heights, like deeply, really. I really loved it, actually. It might have been my favorite.
That's interesting. I want to unpack that in a second. I want to ask you guys if you ever in your high school teen years kissed up against anti-Semitism. Did it ever enter your life in any way? Did you ever have sort of an incident or anything that, because I did sort of, but I'm just curious as if whether you guys did.
For me, not really. Nothing I can think of specifically. There's nothing that affected me. And I actually think my experience was very similar to both Barry Levinson's and Ben's in Liberty Heights, because, you know, he talks about how his entire world, like for Ben, the main character, his entire world was Jewish. And, you know, there was an Asian classmate that he assumed was Jewish because everything he knew was Jewish. And then slowly that began to unravel as he stepped further and further into the world. That was me. I wanted to get a Hanukkah gift for Mrs. Wong, my kindergarten teacher. And my mom was like, I'm not so sure about that, you know? And I mean, I went to a Jewish preschool and Hebrew school, and our public schools in West Orange had days off for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur because there were so many Jewish teachers. So to me, that was normal. And then, you know, you inch outside of that and you go to college and there are people who've never met a Jew. And it's like, what? I don't understand. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting. But as far as the anti-Semitism goes, I haven't really had first-person experience, thankfully.
I haven't either. I mean, I spent most of my life in places where Jews were, if not the majority, they were a big enough minority that, or big enough percentage that I never in any way felt marginalized or singled out. I mean, my town was probably a lot like West Orange, Chappaqua. We were about 50%. Jews were about 50% of the white population there, which was about 90% of the town. And then my camp was mostly Jewish, and Penn is kind of classically a Jewish place. You know, Penn is.
I think all counselors went to Penn.
That's where the Jews go.
Yeah.
There was a stat again that I heard when I was there that 70% of the white population of Penn was Jewish, and I think it was 40 overall. So it's a very Jewish school. I'm in Hollywood. That's very Jewish too. So I, didn't mean to kind of travel this Jewish road, but here I am. And no, Phil, I don't think I've ever in any real meaningful way that didn't, in any way that affected me, experience any anti-Semitism.
So I had an incident happen to me in junior high, which in hindsight, I is pretty alarming. And yet at the time I found myself very sort of nonchalant about it. Someone scratched a swastika into my locker in junior
Yeah, that's
high.
fucked up.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. I think that the reason that I wasn't particularly, I mean, obviously it's upsetting, and I certainly wasn't like okay with it, but I also felt in some way like, oh, we're past this. Like, there's just some fucking idiot, and there's just some guy, and you know, they painted my locker immediately. I never had an incident since then. Have no idea who that person was. You know, it was certainly a shocking thing to see on my locker, but I didn't really give it much weight, which is probably a good thing. I have enough anxiety in my life, and I'm sure I could have spun myself out back then about it if I chose to, but I didn't. But now looking back on it, I think to myself, you know, I'm going to a junior high in Toronto, which is a, you know, pretty prominently Jewish city for the most part. There's a large Jewish community there. I wasn't necessarily, the school was close to a very prominently Jewish area. So like it's just surprising, really. Like in Canada that there's this person that did this thing. It's just an odd thing to me. But it stayed with me. And as I was watching this film, I couldn't help but think about it. You know, it's, I don't know. I don't know about you guys. I can only speak for myself, obviously. As much as I identify as a Jewish person culturally, I don't particularly do it. I certainly don't on a religious level. I'm not a religious person. I'm proud of my heritage, and I certainly would want, hopefully, my future kids to know about my grandparents and what they went through and all that sort of stuff. That being said, I don't know. It was a weird moment that this film highlighted for me in a weird way. So, and you know, I think Avalon's probably my favorite of the four.
Me too.
The reason for that being, it reminds me so much of my grandparents. You know, the grandparents in the film look like my grandparents. Those family dinners felt like the Sunday dinners that I had with my grandparents. That immigrant experience is just something that was so is so in my DNA from my childhood. That film resonates with me the most. It's also the saddest one of the four. Like that one, the end of that film is, I mean, it's a pretty brutal film. It's kind of amazing that's a blank check movie. If you ask me, like that's him just cashing in all his chips.
Yeah.
He has two blank checks. He has toys and he has Avalon. But like, yeah. So go ahead, Toby.
Oh, I'm sorry. You and I texted a little bit about this, but
Yeah.
so Avalon was the one that I knew first. I remember seeing it either in the theater or not long after. I think there was literally a field trip with my temple, to go see it. I remember, the line, "You cut the turkey without me." Like that was every Thanksgiving. Somebody said it at our table,
Oh, okay. We'll keep, it's all good.
Okay. And I always liked this movie.
Yeah.
Went 10, 15 years without seeing it, revisited it probably 2 years ago. My sister and I watched it again and I liked it. But when I sat down to rewatch it, in the context of these four films, it fucking killed me. And I think a big part of that is having lost my dad and feeling further from his family stories. But it just really got me. And I began to tell you this over text, but there were some super, super specific things in Avalon that were completely aligned with my family's experience. My great-grandmother, Ray, she arrived at Ellis Island on July 4th, 1907. And Avalon opens with Sam arriving on July 4th, 1914. And there are all these family stories about how a relative couldn't get them off the boat for 2 days because of the holiday. So they stayed on the boat and then they got off, and it was my great-grandmother's 10th birthday and she had strawberry ice cream. It was her first ice cream. So now on her birthday, we have ice cream. You know what I mean? So there are all of these things. And another super random thing, when Aidan Quinn, Jules, right?
Jules,
when he gets injured, when he gets beat up,
stabbed or something,
and the grandparents buy a television. My dad's family got a television when my dad and my uncle had the measles. His grandparents bought them a television. You know what I mean? So there were just these little snippets that felt so familiar to me that I absolutely loved it. But one of the things, and if this is veering too far away, tell me. One of the things that I loved about this oeuvre, whatever you want to call it, what's the word, Kenny?
Tetralogy.
That. There were things that connected all of these movies, and some of them were super subtle, and some of them I thought were pretty overt. But I started noticing when I was watching Tin Men, because it was the same diner waitress, Florence, and who I think was probably actually a diner waitress there. And then Bagel, Michael Tucker, was in both movies. And I was like, okay, so there's a little bit of a world that they're creating here. And then I was completely gobsmacked in the final moment of Liberty Heights when older Ben is doing a voiceover, and he says, "I had a relative who once said, if I knew things would no longer be, I would have tried to remember better." And that's a quote from Sam Krasinski in Avalon. And so, I don't know, everything it felt whole. It felt like this world was created, and I totally bought into it. But I do think it's really interesting when you separate them and look at each film on their own, how different they are. And I don't know if that reflects where Barry was in his life at the time, or if it reflects just a different, pie piece as far as his experiences growing up. I don't know. I'm kind of fascinated by it.
Yeah, I like it too. It's funny because it's also about Baltimore, but it's like the different seasons of The Wire in its own way, right?
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, each one, they are connected. These guys clearly are in each other's world. You mentioned the waitress. They use the same diner in Liberty Heights and in Avalon. They live on literally the same street of row houses.
There's no diner in Avalon, which I thought was weird because there's
no diner in Avalon.
Diner in the others, yeah.
But the other three, they all go to the Fells Diner.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, don't we see the diner actually being lowered in Avalon? We actually see the diner. We see Elijah Wood looks at the back of the car at one point, and you actually physically see them building. You see the diner being lowered.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
I didn't
It's
know
incredible.
That.
Yeah.
Side something real quick. The diner was literally, they found it in a diner graveyard in New Jersey and chucked it down and put it exactly where they wanted it in Baltimore.
That's awesome.
New Jersey would have a diner graveyard. That seems
right.
Diner culture, I am very nostalgic for. I think about going to diners, all the real diners, right? Like it's not so much even about the food, which it kind of is, but it's about the setting. It's about those roads. Yeah. All right. But I think, yes, it reminds me a little bit of Tin Man. And that's kind of where, The Wire, that's kind of where I feel like that's how Tin Man falls into this, in that it's not explicitly about the same culture, but it is about the same group of people trying to accomplish the same ends in the same city at the same time. And the other thing that this movie, one through line throughout this movie is the obsession with Cadillacs, right? Mm-hmm. And all these movies,
are about cars.
And that Cadillacs,
this
American-made supercar that was the status symbol at the time that you had made it. Like the Cadillac for Danny DeVito's character in Tin Man was more important than his home. It was more important that he had a Cadillac than he had his home. Yeah. So I think that really, I think these movies taken together, and honestly, not so much Diner, but the other movies taken together are an incredible kind of distillation of the immigrant experience. Diner is kind of the beginning of where it goes wrong, in my opinion, of where that next generation forgot where they came from and decided life was more important. Decided it was more important to quiz your future wife about the Colts. What are you doing? What are you doing? Grow up.
I will say this. The latter three films are all very much about an immigrant or the son of an immigrant trying to make a living, trying to support a family, and not necessarily successfully. And I think that's very accurate, especially like Avalon. Like, if you talk to people about what their grandparents did for a living, all of the things that you saw,
it's incredible,
were accurate.
Wallpaper hanging, sold TVs, and that's good stuff to me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Aluminum siding, like that is what generations of families were built on. Those
it's a little physical for the Jews, though, I will say.
Yeah, I don't agree with you. I mean, not that group of Jews.
I mean, my grandfather was an electrician. I mean, but yeah. I think what's one of my, there's a lot of wonderful moments in Avalon, but the moment when Michael is watching Sam put up the wallpaper in the house, and he says, you don't need to know how to do this. You should never have to know how to do this. Sorry, go ahead, Kenny.
That's why I think Diner in its own way, Diner to me is only brilliant when taken with these other four films. Mm-hmm. On its own, I think it's complete boomer trash. But when you take it as where we went wrong, where we stopped worrying about what was important, started worrying about ephemeral bullshit, then it's an interesting story about kind of the decline of American hard work and American culture, and our dive into like things like going to strip clubs and treating women like trash, and worrying more about sports than people. I mean, I said this to Phil, but I can't believe that they never showed Steve Guttenberg's wife's face in the movie? How do you have
I
a
loved
movie?
that
Tell me, explain that to me.
because it illustrated how he felt. It didn't matter. She was a thing. She wasn't a character. She was kind of a means to an end as far as a life goes. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I thought it was deliberate and I appreciated it.
I appreciate that take. That's the only good take. Like, that's the only. I
We're
guess
allowed
that's
to fight, Kenny.
no, I don't want to fight because you have a good
do.
take. I love fighting, but I don't think that anyone. I don't think I've ever heard that from anyone else. Right? I don't think anyone has ever taken it to task for that. But I never thought Diner was an indictment of these people. Now, having watched all 4 of these movies, and I still don't think a Diner is an indictment of these people. I think when you have a fucking, fade to black and white freeze frame on 5 guys together at a wedding, having quote unquote made it, and Steve Guttenberg who I love personally, Steve Guttenberg having grown up from the guy who dances on the stage with the strippers to the guy who can actually get over his ridiculous Baltimore Colts test and move on with his life. I do think it was a triumphant moment for these group of guys. That being said, when taken in concert with these other 4 movies, the last 3 about people trying to feed their families and failing, or like failing and coming back or struggling, it is an interesting indictment of the boomer generation who had it all fucking wrong from the beginning. But I never thought Barry Levinson was putting that out there.
I don't think that was intentional. I think my take is that Diner had to be the first one. He was the youngest when he made that. It was about his youth. And I think that had to come out first to make room for everything else. And I think upon reflection, if Diner had come out last, it would feel like more of a deliberate indictment. Mm-hmm. I think it is kind of an indictment that naively was not intentional. He didn't have enough space to reflect and realize that, maybe. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I agree with this take strongly.
Thanks.
Can I just, I want to just quickly, I agree with you, Kenny. I don't think Diner, and we texted about this a little bit. I don't think that Diner on a story level is a particularly good story, or a particularly great script. That being said, what I love about Diner and Tin Men and Avalon, and felt was lacking in Liberty Heights, was the messiness of dialogue, the vibe of the dialogue, the way everyone talks over each other, the crackle and kind of that electricity in those scenes that feels so lived in, right?
I don't agree with that at all.
That's fine. I think that I talked about this with Kenny a little bit in terms of those hangout scenes in Diner feel very reminiscent, or at least feel as though you can see a little Tarantino, you can see a little Favreau, you can see a little bit of Linklater in terms of that sort of letting these people talk the way people talk. They talk over each other. There's that almost Altman-esque way that everyone talks over each other. Those dinner scenes, those family dinner scenes in Avalon have that cacophony of voices. The Tin Men scenes when all of them are in scenes together, those large group scenes also have that energy to it. I did not feel that energy in Liberty Heights as much. It's not to say that I didn't like the scenes in Liberty Heights. And by that, I mean the scenes with the kids at the diner or wherever they might very well be congregating. But my issue with Liberty Heights ultimately is that I think it has a little bit of air in it, and if you could have pulled like 10 minutes out of it, it just would have moved a little better for me. It felt a little slow. I don't dislike the film, and we'll talk about all the reasons that we do like it. But it does feel different from the other 3 films in a couple ways. I think in what I just mentioned in terms of pacing, but also in terms of production. Liberty Heights looks exquisite. Christopher Doyle, who's a tremendous cinematographer who's shot some of Wong Kar-wai's films, is a phenomenal director of photography, and the film looks exquisite. it looks a lot better than the previous three films. Ultimately, like it really just it's really soaking in the period in a way that's beautiful and loving, and I'm absolutely pulled into it, but it doesn't have the grain that you have in Alan Davido's photography in Avalon, which is intentional. It's supposed to look like those old movies of the time. So it's just different vibes. They all hold together. We've talked about how all four of these films are wonderful, and they all hold together in their own different ways. I just felt like Liberty Heights felt a little bit like the largest gap he had. I mean, I think it was over 12 or 13 years between
9 years between Avalon.
9 years in Avalon. So I just felt that gap a little bit. I felt a little bit like it feels a little bit like him going back to the well. And I know that sounds more negative than it should, but it does feel a little bit like a film that he, might not have intended to make when he made the previous three films. And for all we know, I don't even know if Avalon was something. I don't know if he ever thought about it as a trilogy. I think it could have kind of just fallen together that these four films happened. But that's where I fall on it.
Can I say one thing about Diner before we
please
get
into
further?
Liberty Heights? Yeah.
So Diner's never going to be my favorite movie. For a lot of reasons. I do really like it though, but I think you touched upon this, Phil, the legacy of it. It was the first to really be I was reading all these articles about it, and basically they credit it with being the first quote unquote successful film or TV show or whatever about nothing. And, there's this whole conversation that Barry Levinson had with one of the producers about the scene with the roast beef at the diner when he's like, are you going to eat that? If you're going to eat that, I won't eat it, but you're not eating that. Are you going to, whatever, that whole thing, which I think we've all felt at some point. And the producer was like, there's no story there. And Barry was basically like, that's the point. This is about the feeling it evokes. And this is about the fact that conversation, which doesn't push the plot forward, it illustrates the history these guys have with each other and their comfort level and just the familiarity and just what their relationship is. And that is what he was trying to achieve. And I think he did that like leaps and bounds beyond what he even probably expected to do. So for that reason, I think it's kind of fascinating. And when you go and you start listing the other, like the legacy of it and the things that followed, I think you're absolutely right. And I think Diner, it's one of Judd Apatow's favorite films, or his favorite film, for a reason. And you see that in the bones of all of his own work. And so I think it was very influential. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it has a place in history because of the fact that it was the first to do what it did. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that I absolutely agree that I would never ride for what you were talking about, Kenny, in terms of the Colts trivia for your future wife. I would there's no world where I would ride for that plot development. But the vibe of it, that roast beef scene, I mean, I could live in the diner scenes, forever. I just think those are great.
I want to make something clear. I don't give a shit about the Colts thing. It's also like, it's my dad's like favorite little shticky thing. So it's like, it's not that I'm mad at it. I'm mad. I think it's hilarious that they did that. And I think that in and of itself, what Diner was able to do in taking these 6 actors, all wonderful actors, wonderful actors, and make them feel like lifelong best friends is pretty amazing. I do think that what it wrought is not a great thing. I do think that people thinking that
you could just have people sitting around just talking and not be about anything.
You can do it if you're amazing.
Yeah, if you're great. Yeah.
But you can't just do it unless you're amazing. Now I think we've moved away from that, thank God. But for a period of time, I heard over and over again, it's going to be like Diner. It's going to be like Diner, which just says to me, my dialogue is super clever and my friends are super interesting. Yeah. And maybe I am sensitive to this because that was basically what Entourage was. Like, it was like, it's going to be Diner. We love Diner. But it is a problem when you just think that your ability to write dialogue and exchanges in a diner or in some kind of enclosed location is a substitute for a compelling narrative. Give me a narrative. Give me the story. Give me Tarantino every day of the week, and let the incredible dialogue be an accoutrement to a super compelling story.
I completely agree. Sorry, Toby. I didn't mean to cut you off.
You didn't. We talked at the same time. You can go.
I think that I 100% agree. You know, many an indie film in the 90s and early 2000s suffered from, people thinking that they could do what Levinson does here, or quite frankly, what I think Richard Linklater does. Beautifully.
Yes.
Of just allowing people to talk because you love these people and you love what they have to say. And it might not be clever all the time, but it will be genuine. I mean, the roast beef scene is funny. I don't know that's necessarily clever. It works because of the banter. It works because but you know what I mean? Like,
I love the roast beef scene because Paul Reiser's character
is so great.
It was largely improv.
That's a real guy who I deeply fucking despise. And I really identify with Gutenberg being like, are you all fucking with me here? You don't understand what this guy is doing? There's nothing drives me more nuts than the person who asks the open open and obtrusive question and just falls back on, what's the big deal? Grow the fuck up. You want a piece of the sandwich? Answer the sandwich. All right. So now I've changed my mind. I love this movie. Yeah. But I love this movie, but I also feel like, that what it wrought is very not good.
Totally.
That's how I feel.
Yes, and one of the things that part of its legacy, I don't want to say that it wrought this because I like this, and I don't think you can rot things that you like necessarily. I'll have to look into
Who knows? Let's see what it is.
It was also one of the first movies to really incorporate a lot of random pop culture references. They're talking not just sports, but they're talking about different TV shows and movies and the whole Sinatra of it, which we find again in
Mathis,
Liberty Heights.
That's awesome.
Which I loved. But that's how I'm built. That's how I write. That's who I am. And so learning that this was one of the first films to kind of like stick its neck up and be like, hey, did you see that episode of blah, blah, blah? Like that to me is everything.
I like
couldn't
that.
Agree more.
I like that better in a period piece than I do in something. I like it in a modern show, fine if it's good. But in a period piece, that does scratch me like where I itch. You know what I mean?
So what about something like Reality Bites, which now feels like a period piece, but it was quote unquote modern day. And it was completely reflecting on this. It was built on nostalgia for pop culture.
It was also, I will say this about Reality Bites, which is trying to do two things. It's a little bit referential to their adolescence. So like it is kind of period within itself a little bit, but then it's obviously trying to be zeitgeisty with your Gap and your Melrose Place and your what have yous. But yeah, I think that movie's trying to have his cake and eat it too, and successfully doing so. But
it's okay in general. And particularly in like the 90s, it's a different story than perhaps today, but it's okay with general. Your whole idea is to get the point across. And if you can get the point across, whatever it works. I love it in a period piece, and I also like it in retrospect because I think it's fun to see what was important enough to reference at the time. The way a Melrose Place reference worked, or the way a Gap reference worked within the context of the script. I do, look, I try not to do it anymore because I do feel like people ding it. But, if I was writing something like South Park and I knew that I could write something today and it would be on the air in 4 days, I would do it all the time. Like I just watched that South Park, the one they just put out, the Q in the pandemic thing.
I haven't seen it, but yeah.
It only works because they were able to write it on Thursday and put it out on Sunday. Everything moves so fast now that all the jokes will be old in a few days.
Yeah. All right, let me give a synopsis of Liberty Heights an hour into this podcast. This semi-autobiographical.
I think that's not actually our record, by the way.
Not even close. It's not our record in this podcast. I mean, we've just, some of the reasons have done it. Yeah. This semi-autobiographical film by Barry Levinson follows various members of the Kurtzman clan, a Jewish family living in suburban Baltimore during the 1950s. As teenaged Ben, played by Ben Foster, completes high school, he falls for Sylvia, played by Rebecca Johnson, a black classmate, creating inevitable tensions. Meanwhile, Ben's brother Van, played by Adrien Brody, attends college and becomes smitten with a mysterious woman, and their father, Joe Mantegna, tries to maintain his burlesque business. Liberty Heights opened on November 17th, 1999 against Pokemon, the Bone Collector, it would go on to make $3.7 million on a $11 million budget. It's got 85% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 76% from audiences. Roger Ebert gave it 3.5 stars and said, Liberty Heights has some weaknesses. I thought that the little Melvin character was a little too broadly drawn, and I thought that the whole subplot about how he tries to collect his winnings could not unfold as it does here. The Mantegna character comes across not merely as a nice guy, but positively Gandhi-like. But those flaws are not fatal, and the movie emerges as an accurate memory of that time when the American melting pot, splendid as a theory, became a reality. I mean, I think that this film also feels it kind of sticks out in 99 as kind of, I don't want to say a relic necessarily, but it does feel like Levinson at this point doesn't feel as relevant as he did, such years earlier. So the film does feel a little bit sort of, I keep thinking about, being John Malkovich, Magnolia, Fight Club. I think about how crazy a year it was and why, and it doesn't surprise me that a film like this gets lost in that. You know what I mean? When you have a year of like Election and I guess even to a degree American Beauty, it's not crazy to me that this film doesn't pop, but I don't know how you guys feel about that.
It certainly feels like an early 90s film.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. And it feels like a Barry Levinson film. And Barry Levinson films are very much of the 1980, early 80s, but really like that 85, 86 Good Morning Vietnam thing through the early 90s. I mean, you look at his filmography, and I think he kind of finishes with Bugsy in 91. Now, I want to say Wag the Dog is a great movie. I think Sleepers is a pretty good movie too. But those don't really feel quite as Barry Levinson-y as this run from Diner, The Natural, Tin Man, Good Morning Vietnam, Rain Man, Avalon, Bugsy, right? Those were movies that really could only be made in that period, 1984 to 1991, and feel very Levinson-y. And this Liberty Heights also feels like it falls back there.
I agree with you on the Wag the Dog. It does not feel like a Levinson film. I think that Sleepers has
kind of does
vibes of this tetralogy,
much darker than
and also
anything he's done.
I remember I read the book of Sleepers before it came out because I knew that he was making it and it had this cast and I was interested and what have you. That's a prime example of he just got over his skis. It's too long. Like you have these megawatt stars. The movie should be 95% them, but instead it's like 50% kids and 50% older cast. You got to sit through 45 minutes to an hour of those kids before you even get to your main cast, which is sort of insane. Like Sleepers is one of those movies that like I wish, similar to The Minus Man, that we could re-edit Sleepers and it would actually be a fantastic movie. I disagree
with you, man, because like the kid stuff is the stuff.
The kid stuff is the stuff, but the kid stuff can absolutely do what it needs to do and not take up an hour of screen time.
But you don't want to watch that courtroom stuff. You don't want to watch Brad Pitt is the bumbling fake prosecutor prosecuting his own case. The whole thing is it's an absurd premise. Billy Crudup is just the journalist assigned to the case, and
that's Jason Patrick.
Sorry, Jason Patrick is just the journalist assigned to the. Billy Crudup is one of the murderers.
He's one of the murderers. Him and Ron Eldard. Yeah.
Good murder. It was a good murder. The guy deserved to die. Not saying it's a bad murder.
It's a weird movie that doesn't work. I'm not writing for it. I just think there's an interesting movie in that, and I think that was
the Stand By Me part.
I think that the Barry Levinson that connect, like the Sleepers that connects, Barry Levinson has a whole third act to his career. I think that Sleepers is, for all intents and purposes, that's when the rubber meets the road for him.
But he did wag the dog. He did wag the dog the next year. So like he certainly had his chance to come back, and he did Sphere, which anyone would do, and
everyone's favorite Michael Crichton adaptation.
Yeah, but anyone would do that because it really was the next one up.
Of course, sure.
And
right.
And I think it's
not with that cast though.
I think it's Liberty Heights that destroyed him. You
It might
spend
be.
$11 million on like your fourth passion project. You made 3.7, and the movie got good reviews. So that almost, I think, signals, the thing this guy's selling is just not connecting with.
Having a cast of Dustin Hoffman, Sharon Stone, and Samuel L. Jackson is a choice, though. That's a strange cast for that movie.
Can we talk about casting as far
Please.
as movies I've actually seen?
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
don't apologize. I just can't add to it.
No. Yeah.
Without being snarky. The casting, I mean, obviously Diner is ridiculous. And a lot of those people, Paul Reiser literally went with a friend to the audition, and the casting director saw him in the hall and was like, do you have a headshot?
Are you Jewish?
Yeah. And all those people obviously went on to do huge things.
It's an amazing thing. To go 7 for 7 like that is wild.
Also, at some point we should discuss how 80s Mickey Rourke looked in the 50s.
Oh yeah.
It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
He looked hot. He looked really, really hot. Like he was.
Well, that's a given at that age, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he was really if I were to rank them based on attractiveness, which is the kind of thing I would do, he's so far and above the rest of them. But I think
Who's number 2?
Got it. Gutenberg's got to be 2. Oh, Tim Daly. I forgot. So the Goys went.
What about Bacon? Kevin Bacon?
I think Gutenberg's better.
He was a complete doofus in this. He was so young.
Yeah,
It's a
Tim
smile.
Daly's a good-looking guy. It's so funny. I always forget him, and he's really, really central to this film. Like there might have been there's a version, and they don't do this, and I give him credit for it, but there's a version where you're with Tim Daly from the moment he comes back into town, and follow him to the diner, and he's your way in as his best friend's getting married. I think the movie's really, really, really well done.
I love that we have successfully turned you around on Diner.
You did. I was down on Diner going into this, but now I've changed my mind. I think it's.
But I want us to talk about the casting of Liberty Heights, which I think is fantastic. I think that pretty much across the board, this movie is very well cast. And I know that Ebert highlights the Melvin character that's played by Orlando Jones in his review, saying that he's too broadly written, and that might very well be true. But the casting of Orlando Jones is actually really fascinating to me. I think that casting exemplifies the high wire act he's trying to do with this film in terms of the tone. Like he's trying to find that balance of comedy and drama, which I think the film pretty successfully does, even if Orlando might not be absolutely on point. I think that Ben Foster, Adrien Brody are both fantastic. I mean, BB Newirth just
every day
luminescent in this film. Unreal. Joe Mantegna, also fantastic. Even if I thought he could have been a little scarier. Like he didn't feel as dangerous as I kind of would have liked him to be, but I don't know how you guys felt about that.
I just couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I just kept thinking about Joe and Aidan Quinn and how they were, for all intents and purposes, well, Aidan Quinn was more of a lead than Joe, I guess, but they're not Jewish.
Not
and
Jewish,
Aidan Quinn was a great Jew.
Great
and I
Jew.
was so proud. I mean, he was just really good. And I think
Yeah.
you have to be careful because it can become a little offensive. Talk
about good-looking Jews, though. It's annoying.
And
that
also
when you
3 generations of blue-eyed Jews. You've got Armin Mueller-Stahl and Aidan Quinn and Elijah Wood and a blue-eyed Jew on this.
It's a thing.
I wish you guys could have seen Kenny just get as close to the camera as he possibly could.
I should bring in my little Aryan children so you can see a couple of blue-eyed Jews. But I think all right. So I think it's a really interesting thing. First of all, it's so annoying that when you have to cast a good-looking Jew, you go goy. Happens all the time, you know. I mean, like Brendan Fraser, you're a good-looking Jew in that movie.
True.
Where you go to the Jews of Munich. I mean, come on with that shit. Banna and Craig are your Jews.
The Jews of Munich.
The Jews of Munich. I mean,
it's a great album.
Junics. Yeah, I mean, it turned us into eunuchs.
Oh, boy.
Hey! But Aidan Quinn, this is the first thing I thought when I saw Aidan Quinn on screen. I immediately looked up to see if he ever played Frank Sinatra. Because, my God, he really looks like a young Frank Sinatra. I thought he was great. I absolutely loved Joe Mantegna in Liberty Heights. If he was scarier, it would have made the scene where he had to say goodbye less effective.
It's true.
And that was my favorite moment of all four
movies.
Moment. It like destroyed me when he takes the two boys into like that and BB Newirth's story about him getting beaten up and then going to the JCC and learning to fight, and that's a really good character thing. And he did kind of figure it out with Little Melvin, but he kind of didn't. And it's just this and Tin Man and Avalon to some extent too. You know, there's so many incredible success stories about first and second generation Jews in terms of finding their way in various weirdo industries. Mm-hmm. If you look at all the Jews you know whose grandparents and parents have had success, it's in things like shoe shining or importing textiles or all these weird vacuum cleaners, all these weird things that they just found some little way in. But every Jew didn't succeed, and every immigrant didn't succeed. And the stories of these people who couldn't figure it out, it's crushing.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting, though, because Sam in Avalon, you get a glimpse at his failures. He talks about the nightclub that he owned, you know, stuff like that. And then
his brother's bailing him out, too. That's one of the things that his brother's upset about when he cuts the...
Yeah. But the thing as far as, was his name Nate? Was Joe's...
Nate was Joe Mantegna.
Nate was Joe Mantegna.
I don't think I would have cared for him as much if he was a little meaner or more dangerous, because it broke my heart that he found himself in this burlesque industry and was floundering and just doing it all for his family. One of the things he says when he says goodbye to his kids is that their education is still covered. Mm-hmm. That's what it was all for, you know.
I also... Sorry, go. Please, sorry. Toby, I didn't mean to cut you
No.
off.
So my point is, I think he was more sympathetic because he was kind of a quiet giant.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like, and now I'm gonna take back my note of saying that he needed to be more dangerous, because there's one moment when you sense how scary he can be, and it's when Ben dresses up as Adolf Hitler for Halloween. And obviously his mother is like, you're not going out. Mm-hmm. Yes. And his mother's like, you're not going out like that. She calls the father at work and says, your son is dressed up like Adolf Hitler. He says, put Adolf on the phone. We don't hear what the father says, but the reaction on Ben.
And then he says, put the Fuhrer on the phone. Yeah.
And he's at the reaction, the body language, you don't know what he's saying, but you know it's not good. And you know that it's scary. Does actually maybe speak to what I was talking about.
So what you guys think of that moment? Not the moment you're talking about, but the moment when Ben Foster's character decided to dress as Adolf Hitler.
I think that is one of the moments in the film that proves how heavy-handed the statement was.
Sure.
I don't know. It felt divisive. It felt unnecessary, kind of, for me.
I didn't need it, but I don't know, how you feel, Kenny.
I mean, I love a guy in uniform, but come on.
I felt the way you guys felt. And I was all like it was the kind of moment where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be in on this movie.
Yeah.
I was kind of trying, it puts a lot of thoughts into your head. So basically what happens is Ben Foster, it's around Halloween and he's talking to his grandmother. What should I do for Halloween? You should be a pirate or a Viking or some other stupid shit. He comes down dressed as Adolf Hitler. It's an excellent costume.
It is a well done. Yeah.
Worthy of sound of music. It's beautiful. Except for the swastika on his arm. But so it got me thinking. All right, this takes place in 1954. They say in the movie 9 years after the war ended. At that moment, how would that have been received? In the 90s, was that an acceptable joke? Because this is still your protagonist, right? I don't mean an acceptable joke. I mean the kind of joke you can come back from. Because if someone did that today, you could not come back from that. That would be the end of that character. You would never root for that character again.
I think it's the equivalent of blackface.
Yeah.
It's as bad, for sure. But in 99, clearly Levinson thought this was just some kind of transgressive joke that your sympathetic protagonist can do as a way to stick his thumb in the eye of his presumably, I don't even want to say anything else. Some of the side of his religious Jewish parents and his religious Jewish grandparents in a lighthearted way. And that was very tone deaf to me.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I will say this, up until this point, for the most, Levinson knows where the line is. Like he's always kind of known where the joke is. Mm-hmm. So that was I think we can all agree, a pretty significant miscalculation in terms of him thinking like this is an audacious joke that's totally gonna fly right now, and it doesn't. It also, if I'm being completely honest, I'm not even really sure I totally know what Ben's end game was. Like it feels sort of like a thing that happens because he needed something to happen, as opposed to, it just didn't feel motivated. I just didn't get it.
Well, flip side of that, devil's advocate, is it falls flat in the way that choice from a naive teenager would fall flat. He doesn't see the whole picture.
Yes.
On that level,
That's
I
true.
think it works.
That might be true.
It does work narratively because I still liked that character.
Sure.
It just feels like some things are just beyond the pale in terms of the, outside of the movie. Where you stop thinking about the character and you start thinking about, why would the director and writer do this? I've seen some depictions of some comedic depictions of Hitler that really work well, like The Producers.
Or Charlie Chaplin.
Or, well, sure, yeah. Or I was thinking, I don't know if you guys ever saw that show, Man Seeking Woman. Simon Rich's show.
Heard of it, I never saw it though.
There's an incredible Hitler riff in that. So it's not impossible, but it's very delicate, and there is nothing delicate about this. There is nothing funny about this. There was no comment here except for and there was also really no. God, I really thought this moment was ill-conceived. There was no real comeuppance for this character for doing that.
I think it was an example of something, again, like you were talking about Little Melvin. This was too broad in a movie that wasn't broad.
Yeah. I think that it's,
but aside from that, it really
in terms of from a plot perspective, it feels like it's Ben's way of, and Ben being the character's way of sort of pushing back. Because at this point, he's so essentially, we've seen the pool or the dock that has a sign that says no Jews, blacks, or coloreds. You're certainly sensing that Ben is feeling the the box that Jews are being put in. He then meets Sylvia, this black student who's in his class. He's almost immediately smitten with her and feels as though he's not allowed to even talk with her. So all of this is again, not writing for it, but I'm just for our audience, our listeners to understand.
He is not allowed to talk to her.
He's not allowed to talk to her. He's not allowed to be near her.
Yeah.
It's so he's wearing this costume as a decree of being like, I'm not allowed to do these things, so I'm going to dress up as the person who, obviously was a dictator. It doesn't work as we've said, for all the reasons that we've discussed, but I just wanted to give some context so people understood where it was coming from. He didn't just dress up like it for absolutely no reason. It's just not a great reason. We then get to meet the person who was obviously in this film. David Krumholtz obviously had to be in this film.
He had a big year. Of playing himself. The only time he hasn't played himself was when he stabbed Lucy and Carter on ER.
On ER, yeah.
I don't know.
Well, somehow, David Krumholtz, no offense to David Krumholtz, I think he knows this, not a good looking man, but very hot in Freaks and Geeks. It's the weirdest thing. We did his episode.
Is he hot in Ice Storm? Is he hot in Ice Storm?
No. I think everybody was hot in Ice Storm.
Anti-hot.
Because it's called Ice Storm. That's ironic because
everyone's hot.
He also got laid a lot in that movie, apparently.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in forever.
No, he's anti-hot in almost every movie, but how he pulled that off in Freaks and Geeks, I don't understand. He's like
he also pulls off the blonde hair somehow.
Does he? Pull off the blonde hair. That's weird. I love a movie that demystifies the 50s, right? I love a movie that it's not all fucking sock hops and poodle skirts and shit like that.
It's on horses and blonde David Krumholtz.
Oh my God, we're gonna have to talk about Carolyn Murphy. But
why should I know Caroline Murphy? I'm sorry, because is she something?
She's a model. She was a supermodel. She's never acted before, never acted since, but she's a supermodel.
That's the answer I was looking for.
Never acted.
But I thought she was really good. You guys didn't think she was really good?
I thought she was absolutely fine. I don't think she blew me away, but when I read stuff about how she was this was her first role, and I was like, why? So that makes sense.
I would have pinned. I mean, we've seen a lot of supermodels a heap as far as first timers go.
She was very good.
I thought she was real alluring and real self-composed. That was not an easy scene that she had to do with Adrien Brody in the beginning.
Or the scene in the motel, for that matter.
No, the motel. Yeah.
No,
motel
yeah. Well, that was really, she really had to put herself out there for that one.
She really did.
And she did. Let's keep going on the movie.
Well, wait, the Krumholtz of it all.
Yes, Krumholtz. Yes.
One thing that stuck out for me, he was on ER, Shane West was on ER, Justin Chambers and Sylvia's father were both on Grey's Anatomy. I'm watching this and I was like, all of these future doctors for the most part.
Yes. And there were at least two Freaks and Geeks people too, because it was Krumholtz and someone else. Oh, Ben Foster.
Both
Freaks and Geeks.
Oh my God, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
He's so wonderful. And he is one of those people who I give credit to him for how kind of deliberate and seemingly picky he is with the projects he chooses.
Totally.
That said, I think he could be what Sean Penn used to be before Sean Penn got super complicated. I think
Easily.
Didn't you also date Robin Wright?
For a long time. Yeah, ironically.
Sean Penn connection, that's all.
Yeah.
So yes, he's working on it.
Yeah. But I think he could be a household name, and he's not, and that kind of fascinates me because
I love Ben Foster. One of my favorite roles is when he was on 6 Feet Under. He was tremendous on that, and I love him. He's really great in this. I mean, again, we said this earlier, but it's a stacked cast. There really is not a weak link in the chain of this entire cast. But in terms of plot, basically Van, played by Adrien Brody. Can we talk about Adrien Brody for just a quick second?
There's a lot of plot in this. This is
Adrien Brody for a long second.
I just want to say he's wearing a wig in this, right? Because he's got a mohawk in Summer of Sam. And I think he's wearing a wig in this. Maybe I'm wrong.
No wig shaming though.
I'm not wig shaming. I think it's an effective wig, but I look at the sides and the way that it looks just slightly off, but that's neither here nor there.
I want to give Toby a long second on Adrien Brody.
Yeah, please. Adrien Brody. Let's talk about him. I'm a big fan.
What are we thinking? What are we thinking when we think of Adrien Brody?
I immediately think that I shouldn't have quit piano. That's my first thought always.
Sure.
But I really like him. I think he's fascinating. I think he pulled off being a Jew, even though I feel like he seems more Italian. I know he's half Jewish, but he wasn't raised Jewish. But I bought it. And him, I mean, when you put him and Ben Foster next to each other and you say these are brothers.
Same gene pool. Yeah.
I mean, that doesn't work. They made it work. Well, Ben was the only one who wasn't, brown and brown hair and eyes or whatever.
Yeah.
It happens.
I know. But I do thoroughly enjoy Adrien Brody.
I think I watched this film, and we talked Adrien Brody a little bit on our Summer of Sam episode with Katrina Longworth, but I do think that he should have been bigger. I often look at one film as a film that weirdly derailed 3 careers in terms of being big movie stars.
The Jacket.
Yeah, the Jacket. I think that King Kong, I think that Naomi Watts, Adrien Brody, and Jack Black all should have been bigger stars. And I think all of them had these expectations put on that film. And obviously it's not just that movie, but I do feel like you can kind of look at that film and see it as a kind of moment for them. But I love Adrien Brody. I think he's got a fascinating look. He's got a really cool vibe.
Do you watch Peaky Blinders?
I have not yet, but I hear. Yeah,
watch it with subtitles, first of all, because it's impossible to understand. He is on it, and he's fantastic.
I mean, I love that he's in some Wes Anderson films, and Wes, obviously, he seems like he belongs in his films. Just his look is just so specific. I watched this film the other day and just really wish that Adrien Brody got to be a big movie star, or at least a leading man.
I think he got to be a big movie star. I just don't think he was able to handle it. I just don't think I agree with you guys, I
don't think he should. He's not ever going to be my favorite. I don't think he's the most talented out there. I think people actually, it's interesting. He won. He was resented.
I think
he also did not get Halle Berry's consent for that kiss, which is kind of fucked up, but that's neither here nor there.
It was a weird move.
Totally fucked up.
Okay, cool. We're all on the same page.
Well, nobody called him out on it until recently, but it is. It's fucking crazy. Yeah. But people thought it was charming. Like it was replayed for years and years and years. Yeah. But I think Adrien Brody's a weird case because Adrien Brody is somewhere between traditional character actor and leading man.
Yeah.
Like it's very hard. Here's what I'm working with. In this movie, he is 6 inches taller than the next tallest Jew he hangs out with. He is broader. He is alpha. He has his tough guy voice. He dresses well. He walks into the room with confidence. He is clearly the leading man of the Jew group, right? But he is not, and he's handsome. I mean, I think he's clearly handsome, but he's not classically handsome, right? He's not even handsome in a Sean Penn kind of way, where it's like he's offbeat handsome,
right?
He's too alpha to be a supporting character. He's too unusual to be a classic leading man. His best route forward is just, this is gonna sound crazy, but great thespian, where you put him in the roles that where you would be saying maybe it should be him, or maybe it should be Philip Seymour Hoffman, or maybe it should be Paul Giamatti, or maybe it should be Daniel Day-Lewis. Whoever can just do the best with it, let's go with them, right? But he's not up to those guys' standards. He's just not up to the standards of our top tippity top guys. So he winds up doing things like Predators, and you don't even know what to do with this guy.
I think that you said something that I think is, and Toby as well, the unorthodox way he looks makes me think a lot about how, and our listeners probably know that I've been watching the AFI movies through the quarantine and watching a lot of films from the 60s and 70s when you were allowed to have a face, when you were allowed to look, unlike the Chris's that we all apparently think that's the new norm. I think that's part of it. And this isn't me saying like he's too weird looking to be a leading man. I agree with what you're saying, Kenny, which is he had his shot and it didn't happen for him. But I do think that's a little bit a part of it. There's this idea that he doesn't look like what we think a leading man's supposed to look like.
What about Dustin Hoffman?
But that's from a different time is what I'm saying. I'm speaking of like Adrien Brody now.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Adrien Brody.
I agree with you, Phil.
Yeah.
The now is weird. The now is, as I think I may have mentioned on a previous podcast, I'm writing a show that, any other time in history, you'd be able to cast a leading man because it's all these people. It's a Hoffman or it's a Richard Dreyfuss or it's these kind, or another thing I'm writing where it would be a Pesci or a DeVito. We don't make those guys anymore. Like we just don't make them. And sometimes we make them and they turn into Miles Teller. You know what I mean? Like Miles Teller was one of these guys until he became like Miles Teller, the bodybuilder man. Yep. So it's hard. Like I love Tom Holland. I just don't want everybody to be Tom Holland.
It's like we're allowed as a gift, like an Ezra Miller. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like every now and then they'll give you, Hollywood will allow someone who feels just slightly off kilter to be perhaps a leading man, if Flash even happens, who knows? But this is all just a long way of saying that I don't know. I dig Adrien Brody. I dig his vibe. I like what he brings to the pictures he's in. I famously remember, it's not famously, but I remember when we were casting Sleepy Hollow, they asked me who I thought should be Ichabod Crane, and I was like, Adrien Brody. And they were like, okay. And part of it was because in my brain, I'm like, that's what Ichabod Crane would look like in 2013.
1,000,000%.
But, and listen, Tom Meissen obviously loved him and very happy with the way it turned out. But my point is he's just so strange. He just feels so unorthodox, and that's exciting. But Kenny, you mentioned the scene at the party when he meets Dubby, which is not a name that I've ever heard before. Have you guys ever heard of the name Dubby?
You and the Jewish grandmother both.
Yeah.
So Dubby, played by Carolyn Murphy, is that her name? Sorry, my apologies. Yeah. Carolyn Murphy. And he's attracted to her. She's mysterious. They have a really great scene with a map. And then they had the banter about how Cinderella doesn't have a magic wand. Like, right, Phil, right. Come on, man. All right, I'm not shitting.
You're saying there's no banter. You were saying there's no banter.
I'm not saying no banter.
There's a lot of that kind of banter. It's well, I mean, when you've got Krumholtz in the mix, he's not going to screw that up.
Yes,
Krumholtz is great. So then Krumholtz gets in a fight with Shane West. It's an ER off. They have a fight. And
revenge.
Shockingly, Krumholtz doesn't do well in the fight. And then Justin Chambers shows up and drives his car into a barn. I don't know.
Justin Chambers playing a lovely man.
Very lovely.
So like I didn't even know than Alex Karev ever was. What?
I didn't even know Justin Chambers existed before Grey's Anatomy. That was a shock to me to see him 5 years earlier in a major role in a major part, movie, like in the role that you'd expect to go to Shane West and maybe he plays the second guy, but he looked great. Like he had like a great vibe. Like 100%. That is what I thought Goys were like for the most part. Like he never gave up his Goys in this period of time. Is Goy a mean word? He never gave up his position of high status to a Jew, but he also wasn't a jerk about it. Like there was an interesting little moment where he figured out that Adrien Brody was in love with his girlfriend, and he, instead of like making fun of him or setting him up to fail or setting him up to be humiliated, he said, I'm just gonna string him along and find someone who he likes. There'll be someone else that he
There's
likes.
someone else. Yeah.
It was
We'll hook
very
the guy
earnest.
up.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice.
Mhm.
Because
it's
like
a kind of a star-making performance in a weird way that didn't happen until
Weird.
obviously Grey's, 6 years later. But yeah,
and where he played
Well,
the
medical
the
school.
seventh
He left
guy
here.
in
He went to medical school. And then he was on
Obviously,
Grace.
yes.
yeah, he's great.
He played like the seventh guy in the call sheet on that though. Like
Yeah.
he and he stuck around forever and certainly made a name for himself. But like, yeah, I wish he'd gone in a different direction. I don't think that I mean, he did a great job on Grey's. And obviously the arc of that character was from like cocky asshole to like lovable guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he was kind of born the second Alex Cariff. You know what I mean?
Yep.
He was kind of like, that's who he more is, like the responsible and what's the word I'm looking for? Like the hero of the downtrodden.
He's very good in this movie. Even if I do question some of his motives at times, just in terms of like, I know that I don't mean it in the sense that he's a bad person, but it's just like, we're jumping around, but like at the end when he's in the hospital bed and he's like, this might be your chance, man. Like this is your chance to hook up with my ex. It was
I felt
a little
honest.
I'm not saying it's dishonest. It's still like a little weird. But anyway.
Yeah,
But I think it's messy in a teenage way.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That felt suicidal to me. That felt like I'm giving it all up. It's over for me.
So at this point, Ben Foster's character, his character's name is Ben, meets Sylvia and introduces himself. He basically follows her on the trolley car to her neighborhood. They have a really nice chemistry.
But sits with her. It's a little different than than an outright stalking.
Yeah, no.
He gets on next to her and no, I know.
It's not
They talk
nefarious.
to each other, yeah.
He gets on next to her. He talks to her. Like he's certainly like made sure that she knew what was going on before he just started following her. And they have great chemistry.
They have wonderful chemistry.
She's a great actress.
She's great.
And I looked her up, and she basically has been in like 3 films in her life. But like I think her name is
Rebecca Johnson. Yeah,
Rebecca Johnson. But I think she could have been a big star.
Their scenes together are wonderful.
They are.
I mean, most of their scenes are there's a big chunk they have basically in her bedroom, where they're listening to comedy records and then they're listening to music records and
they dance.
Somehow Ben premature ejaculates, but because she touches his leg.
I think you know how, Phil.
I mean, I understand the physics of it, the biological reason that it happened. I think it's a little unlikely that her touching his leg would create such. But anyway.
Who knows? Those scenes are fraught with peril.
Yes.
Those are dangerous scenes to put in a movie.
Yes.
That's a dangerous relationship to put in a movie. It almost always comes across as preachy or sanctimonious or cloying or alarmist. And there was just a perfect, in my opinion,
honest.
Yes, 100%.
Very honest, a perfect handled it the way not necessarily the way I would expect, but a way that I believed. I thought those were kind of I really love the stuff with the family, but I thought those were really, really strong scenes in
those
this
scenes
movie.
also. Oh, I'm sorry, Kenny.
That's it. No, go ahead.
They also surprised me. There were some turns where some reactions were unexpected in a lovely sort of way.
Yeah.
I can't think of
She picked him up in her mother's car, which surprised me. She told him to
Mhm.
get down under the seat, which he did. Like there was no pursuer and pursued. They were going into this together at the right pace, at a pace I believe. This wasn't about sex; it was about connection. Totally. It's an interesting little thought experiment about what integration actually meant, right? If the goal of integration were to have Black people and white people in the same space where they can get to know each other, this is going to happen. And yet everybody involved is like, no, this shouldn't happen. Well, what are you guys doing? Well, I mean, why are we integrating schools if you don't want these people to get to know each other? So I loved it, and I even loved the kiss at the end. Like I thought that
I
was
loved the kiss at the end.
And then the
Fuck
moment
off.
where Adrien throws his arm around Ben
Yeah.
as BB Newirth slowly dies. Yeah.
I just love BB Newirth at that point, just sitting down in one of the pews, Joe Mantegna taking a picture potentially accidentally. It's just all it's a really it's a really deft execution of it. I would also say too, is it? I forgive me. The actor's name who from Grey's as well. Is it Perkins?
I think it's James Pickens.
Jim
Jr.?
Perkins. James Pickens.
I think it's Pickens.
My apologies.
Yeah. He's a chief,
as
right?
Sylvia's father, is wonderful. When
Another
he walks
actor.
in on them, he walks into so Sylvia and Ben are hanging out. The father
great.
comes home early, so Sylvia panics and tells Ben to get in the closet. Father walks into the room, sees Ben's shoes, realizes something's rotten in Denmark, says, "What's going on here?" and says, "Mr. Kurtzman, please come out of the closet." He then drives him home. They have a wonderful scene together, which, and I'm going to give a little bit of context. It's earlier in a diner scene. We realize that Ben refuses to leave a car if a Frank Sinatra song is playing. You can't walk out on Sinatra. So when Sylvia's dad is driving him home, he pulls up to his house and Sinatra's playing, and Ben refuses to get out of the car until the Sinatra song is done. It's a tremendous scene. It's perfectly played.
He charms him in that moment.
He charms him. It's true. Because the dad goes, "All right, it's over." Like that's great. That's like, there's something really amazing about that little. All right, I have accepted your ridiculous cultural submission.
But it also just clocked out. So goodbye.
But now get the fuck out.
The one thing I will say, I respected the fact that both families had both parents had equivalent reactions to
the kiss.
their relationship. There was nothing was heightened. There was no super villain. I just think it was, to go back to the word, I think it was just very honest.
Which certainly seems true to life. That certainly seems like all sides were like, public places hang out, private places we're sticking to our own. So I do that's the only thing I give boomers credit for. Just taking one step forward in that regard.
I do. You mentioned the "Kill Me Now," Toby. Earlier in the film, Ben mentions to his mother that there's a black girl in his class named Sylvia, and I think he says, I don't know if he calls her. He says attractive. And she just says, "Kill me now." Like she's already 5 steps ahead. She knows what he means when he says something like that, and God, BB Newirth can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. She's one of the standouts in Summer of Sam as well. With her and Adrien Brody, don't have scenes together, I don't think, but that's a weird reunion in this film. But yeah, she's wonderful. What she does with a look, the thing about her is her presence. It's like she doesn't even need to say anything. It's just BB Newirth is in this scene and you will take notice of that.
There's a strength there. Yeah, just the air. It just changes when she's in a scene.
And the kiss between her and Nate at the end is wonderful. The him blowing her the kiss is just lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, and Shull? Yeah.
BB Newirth is a career that I want to say we left something on the table.
Yeah.
But and we did, maybe, because we didn't make more movies where she would have, just shown. Like she should have started Chicago.
100%.
We just didn't make more movies that would have been like right, in her wheelhouse, I guess. Because like she's obviously amazing in this, but like
she could have chosen theater a little bit. She did a lot of television. I'm watching The Good Wife right now, and she's a recurring judge on the show.
She was on. Feel like
she's incredible, but it's too bad that like BB Newirth is playing, period wives when like, you know what I mean? Wives.
Yes.
As opposed to having her own movies that like showcase all of her incredible talents, because she's one of the most talented
a flight
people.
attendant recently was what I saw her in.
That's right.
But again, you're absolutely right, Kenny. She's apparently in a pilot for something called Julia. I don't know. Which is about the Julia Child thing that they're doing at Amazon, I guess. I love her. I wish she was in more stuff. I agree with you, Kenny. She should be. I adore her. I've nothing.
There are
nothing
just
bad to
people
say
like
about
that.
people.
There are just stage actors like that, or Broadway actors like that, who are just so unbelievably talented, and yet Hollywood generally has them playing prosecutors in Law and Order because they're New York based, and no one wants to put in the work to try to see if we can actually get some kind of musical thing up and running. So it's so rare that someone breaks out in the way that like a Liza Minnelli was able to 40 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's. I mean, maybe she'll be in the Frasier revival. Anyway, moving on. At this point in the film, basically Melvin, played by Orlando Jones, Nate on the side of his burlesque business is doing a numbers game. Melvin bets big on a number that hits, and they don't have the money to pay him back for it. So they essentially give him the business in the hopes that will placate him, which is it's interesting because then he basically runs the business into the ground, which pulls Nate back into the business, which is unfortunately then his undoing. So it's an interesting circuitous route to a place, I thought, from a story perspective.
And also he works with Larry from Three's Company, so that's something.
Yes. And Orlando Jones worked with Jerry from Blackish, so it's
correct. Anthony Anderson.
Yeah, that little scene at the ticket counter.
Yes, it's great.
Where Anthony Anderson is trying to flirt.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Yeah. I also love movies like this where you get someone like an Anthony Anderson, and it's before he had his teeth fixed. It's like pre-dentist. Whenever you get somebody who isn't quite at that level yet,
like Ben Affleck, for instance.
Like the first set of teeth.
Yeah. The first.
It's funny. Anthony Anderson has been a person who's been making money as an actor for about 30 years. So like he's been around for a really long time. And he was this guy. He was this overweight comic sidekick for a long time. And then just kind of slowly, I mean, The Shield had a big part to do with this, in my opinion, because he was so incredible in The Shield. But he's kind of slowly turned into this, the leading man in, America's dad husband now. But I love that. I love that it was Anthony Anderson. He was really cool in this film.
He was. We get a quick scene where I guess because of the time period, which is around the Cuban Missile Crisis, if I'm not mistaken, we get a duck and cover.
It's earlier.
It's before it, but there's a duck and cover scene.
This was 1954, but from as soon as you dropped the bomb in Hiroshima, they started doing this stuff because they knew that other places in the world were capable of creating an atomic bomb. I love the scene of Ben and Sylvia sitting in the hallway with textbooks on their heads. Like that's gonna do a fucking thing.
And they come out and say that. She's like, last year we had to lie down, or whatever it was. But that's crazy. Very. That little, to me, that's a wonder years moment, and I like that a lot.
I loved it too. But Sylvia gives Ben 2 tickets to see James Brown.
One of the best concerts, fake concerts I have ever seen in a movie.
Agree. Totally.
The crowd was out of fucking control. The other thing that was great was this was Avalon, but Elijah Wood, when Elijah went to the movies in Avalon, the way the kid crowd flipped out about that cereal, The Rocket Man, like Barry Levinson got something here. Yeah. He really in this particular movie, Liberty Heights, the way he portrayed that James Brown concert, that James Brown actor was so fucking awesome, and the energy in the hands up in the air, people moving up and down, and screaming up in front, but this was an entire theater of people just like losing their shit in a religious service.
Yep. And it was interesting because he intros one of his songs and he's like, I hope this is my first record. So these people probably haven't really heard him.
No.
Which is fascinating because they're like rabid fans.
Yeah. Or they were just taken with the performance. You know what I mean? Like it's really something to. It's funny. I was watching the Grammys last night, and they did a whole piece on the Apollo Theater and James Brown and the guy who that sort of that idea of that type of concert feels just so infectious. I just can't even imagine what it must have been like to be in that space.
How good was Bruno Mars doing Little Richard?
It was great. Great.
My daughter, who hates anything that was made before 2018, was up and dancing to it. It was wild.
Awesome. It's great.
Yeah.
So they go to the James Brown concert. Ben brings his friend along. Him and his friend are the only white people in the audience, essentially. And this is when Melvin sees the kids there, sees the car outside the venue, puts two and two together that the two white kids must be, that one of the kids must be related to Nate. So he kidnaps the kids along with Sylvia and her friend. I'm not sure I totally think this plan is great. Like I'm not entirely convinced that this is the most thought through plan. But perhaps that's the point. This portion of the film, I wasn't really sure how to feel. I wasn't sure how to feel about Melvin pointing a gun at Ben and demanding that he touch Sylvia's breast. All of it just felt very menacing.
Heavy-handed.
Yeah, menacing at a time when it felt out of character of this film.
100%. That was my least favorite anything in the movie. That said, the scene where he is pointing the gun, the moment between Ben and Sylvia, and when Ben refuses to do it,
yes, that's great.
Was worth the mess of the rest of it.
Totally agree. And perhaps that was, you know what I mean, a means to an end, which he was like, I want this, so I'm gonna have to do this to get this, and that's fine. But I yes, and the kiss she gives him on the cheek, and the spine that Ben shows in that moment, refusing to, it's a lovely moment.
Yeah, it's hard to square the little Melvin character with the rest of this film. It just is. Yeah. You know, I think having your main villain be a black drug dealer, which is what he was. He was a drug dealer. We didn't see him deal drugs, but they said that he dealt drugs. Yep. Is it? I don't mean this in like the snarky way. It's a choice, right? It's a choice. You're telling a story about integration. You're telling a story about people who are, you know, essentially the underclass of a city. Like you will have people who deal with that. Joe Mantegna's running numbers. Joe Mantegna's running a burlesque club. You know, there are no angels among this group. Little Melvin's also being fucked over, right? He's also being fucked out of money that he won fair and square. So his plan, while harebrained, is not a crazy escalation given what we have. But it's played tonally like without conviction, I guess what I would say. I think it's a difficult needle to thread, and the needle was not threaded here, but I let it go. I would let it go. Like it did so much for Ben Foster's character. It did a lot for Joe Mantegna's character to me, putting his family in that situation. That's certainly not something that he planned on doing in his life. It does kind of reduce Orlando Jones to an evil black villain, which is not the best. And you kind of have to, wrestle with that as you're dealing with this movie and assessing this movie. But there's definitely positive aspects that came out of this.
I agree. I think that the fact that it gives us the Ben Sylvia moment almost makes it worthwhile, or does make it worthwhile. At this point,
it was awesome. That was shocking.
Sorry?
Like that was the Ben moment with Sophie was awesome. Yeah. I don't want to undersell it. It's like the man had a gun pointed at his head and was being forced to do something with a gun pointed to his head. I have never seen a character call the gunman's bluff in that situation. Yep. And he didn't even call it where he was like, look, if you kill me, you're not going to have anything anyway. No, you're not going to do it. The entire way he played that was, I'd literally rather have you shoot me than,
violate.
Like, what a guy.
Yeah. Mensch is the word you're looking for. Yeah.
What a mensch. And the balls of Levinson to write that, because that's a hard scene to write, and then to believe that you could find an actor who will accurately
pulled it off.
Stick it. Yeah, no, 100%.
stick that. Yes. A 16-year-old who could do that.
So at this point, Van gets word that Trey is in surgery after a car accident, and Dubby asks him to go with her to the hospital. They go on a drive together to Virginia. So there's a moment in the car here where
you know what a great little scene was when David Krumholtz and Adrien Brody go to Justin Chambers' house, and Krumholtz is just talking about how everything there is old and they can't afford new furniture, and
it's a mansion with a butler.
It's a
antiques everywhere.
Antiques everywhere, yes. And he's like, "Oh, I mean, my table's for Micah. You can't even see anything on it. You spill on this." And
doesn't he also go by the name Yates?
To be fair, his name is Yussel. So yes, he does change it to
he goes by Yates.
That was a big part of Avalon that they all changed their name. That was kind of
that was a great scene.
No,
Kurtzman, Kirk and Kay.
Well, in Kurtzman, presumably, if Ben is talking about Sam Krasinski being a relative.
Yeah.
Like in my mind, that branch of the family just belongs to one of the other brothers.
Yeah. Which is totally possible. Yeah.
I'm sure you're right.
So Dubby says something in this car scene where they start they're talking about sex. She's talking about sex with Trey, and she says, "I love sex, but Trey thinks I can get out of control." There's definitely stuff about Dubby up until the motel scene, which feels like it's playing into a fantasy, obviously, of what sort of Van is hoping that this woman is going to be. And then obviously when we get to the motel scene, where we the seeds are planted that she has a drinking problem earlier in the film. But it really comes to fruition at the motel, where she, gets very, very, very drunk. They make out a little bit. She gets very drunk. And there's this sort of self-loathing kind of weird, vicious cycle that you're assuming Dubby is stuck in. And she has a great line when she's throwing up in the toilet and she turns to him and says something along the lines of, "How much do you love me now?" or something like that. Mm-hmm. Again, like coming back to sort of what you were saying, Kenny, in terms of Levinson zigging when you think he's going to zag. Like this film is doing things that you don't expect. You don't expect Dubby to become, for this motel scene with Van and Dubby, you're not expecting Ben and Sylvia to end up in the back of a car at gunpoint. Like these are unexpected turns for sure. And also, quite frankly, unexpected in the mosaic of this four films. You know what I mean? Like this movie stands out in that way, which I think is interesting. Mm-hmm. Then Melvin gets arrested. He basically, I guess the impression is we get that he rats out Nate and his partner in the process. Is that that's what I deduced? Sorry, Larry from Three's Company. And they're charged with prostitution and racketeering. People believe, and obviously rightly so, that they're being overcharged because they're Jewish, and that it looks like he's going to get 8 years in prison, I think is what I gleaned. Whereas Melvin's getting like 6 months or something like that.
8 to 10 months, I think they said. Yeah. They said they were making an example of the Jewish guy, which seemed to pan out, and they said that they were getting him on prostitution, even though he was not, fostering prostitution. But they said anytime you bring someone over state lines and she engages in, or he or anyone engages in any form of prostitution, you are liable. So that seems to be what happened, and it was a very brutal goodbye scene.
We just before we wrap up, I just want to rewind very quickly just to the burlesque club for a second, because there's a new.
I've never seen a club like that.
It looked great.
It looked like a Broadway theater, but but except there was burlesque shows, but not even burlesque shows. There's one.
It was like vaudeville burlesque.
Vaudeville with like a hot nurse.
Budget shit pressing, playing to like 12 people, 12 creepy old men in this massive theater. It was if that
pretty
really
depressing.
You wonder why they had money trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was running numbers on the side, and then he was lying and saying that he was making more money on his burlesque show than he was
but they bring in a new girl whose costume isn't there, and she has some sort of issues with wearing someone else's costume. So she essentially wears not crazy, and decides to wear or is told to wear. I guess it's like her work clothes is sort of the impression that I get, like a waitress outfit of some sort, kind of.
I think it was just her clothes.
It was just her clothes.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like a cardigan, a blouse, and a skirt.
She puts on a hell of a show, and the men love it. And they turn the lights out on her when they're afraid that she's going to cross a line and expose too much of herself. I say all of this just to underline that there is no prostitution going on in this club, and that if anything, Nate was incredibly aware of where the line was as to what he could or couldn't get away with.
He enforced it, yeah.
He enforced it. So, and then you have a beautiful scene where at the synagogue where Nate manages to is able to. Well, sorry. Before that, we have the graduation scene, which we talked about, but then we have a scene where. Adrien Brody meets with Trey at the diner because Trey has relatives that are involved in the justice system, and he's able to find out the details as to what's going on, and he's able to pull some strings so that he can go and look at the new Cadillac before
after Rosh Hashanah services.
After Rosh Hashanah services, which is great. I mean, listen, guys, it's a very good movie. I mean, it's funny. I want to rate this, but I also need to say that as I was watching it the other day, and this hasn't happened to me yet that I can remember, where like I feel like I've seen the movie, but I only have fragments in my head, and it's possible that this is because I maybe put it on in one of the video stores that I was working at. And so like I wouldn't feel right ranking this film in 99 is the point I'm trying to make, because I don't really have a recollection of it that feels fully formed. So I will say that I came into this podcast not with the highest rating of this film. And I wonder if it had to do with my affinity for maybe specifically Avalon, but for Diner and Avalon, and that this film just is of a piece, but also isn't of a piece in its own weird way. For whatever reason, this film, I didn't have the best experience watching this film. I liked it fine.
What'd you give it, Phil?
So I came into this podcast giving
Stop
it a
teasing us.
Giving it a 65.
Okay.
Which I think is too harsh, and you guys have done a much better job, and I am much higher now than I was coming into it. But I just
high five, Kenny.
Virtual high five. I think that I think part of it was just, for whatever reason, it just didn't all kind of gel for me in the way that I wanted it to. But talking with you guys and sort of seeing the stuff that worked really did work a lot better than I was given credence to. So I'm at a 79 now. I think that it's,
wow,
I do think it's a much better film than I came into it thinking. So that's where I'm at. What about you, Kenny?
I feel the same way you do, Phil, because I definitely feel like I've seen bits and pieces of this. There are things that came back to me, but I don't remember having ever watched this anywhere near beginning to end.
Yeah.
I gave it an 83 before and said I liked this film a lot. Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna stick it at 83. I think it's right there. I do think it is one of the better films of this year. Not top 10, but pretty high up there. And I think
you don't get any nominations.
I've started thinking about actually keeping a running list of of potential nominees because of this movie, because I think there's some performances I don't want to forget in this movie.
Correct.
As we get closer to our 52 review.
Mm-hmm.
I think all four of these films are maybe not Tin Man, though it's close,
mm-hmm.
are 80 plus. I really did like Tin Man, but it's pretty thin compared to the other three. So yeah, I think they're all really, really wonderful films. All right around this area for me. You know, I think this is always just a worthwhile watch. I'm happy I did it.
Series that we did, a mini series that kind of which was great.
Yeah.
What about you, Toby?
Toby, hit it up.
So I didn't see it in 99 or since. I just watched it for this. So I have no previous ranking, which maybe says something. Excuse me, I don't know. But I'm torn. I think that the ranking I have for this movie is heavily influenced by the fact that I chased Avalon with it, and Avalon is my favorite out of these, and I have a very kind of heightened emotional tie to Avalon, more than, I think we said this before we even started, Phil, but it really affected me emotionally more than it ever has this time when I rewatched it. That said, some of the things that we've kind of pieced together put this in a little bit of a different light for me in a good way. And I was actually going to say 83 as well, Kenny. I think it's a solid movie. I think
it's the right number.
I think the performances are fantastic. And I think it's just a really interesting addition to the other three films. And when you look at them as a triceratops or whatever, what is it called?
Quadriceratops.
When you look at it as that, it has its place, just like Tin Man has its place in there. Yeah. They all kind of build off of each other in different ways. But I feel like, again, back to the family of it all, I feel like they're all cousins.
I was really excited to watch all four of these in sequence. I've never obviously done that before. I had never seen Tin Man before, quite frankly. It was wonderful to see how they're all kind of connected to one another in a way that isn't overt. I really did get chills when I saw that diner get lowered. It's a tremendous moment because it really did make me feel like this is all of a piece in a way that's not hacky and shitty. It felt very organic. Everything really did feel like it grew off of itself. So in that respect, I really loved it.
I do think the connective tissue is the Barry of it all. I think that's the piece of him in every film.
Sure. So next week, I'm curious if you've seen this film, Toby. Have you ever seen Tumbleweeds?
Yes.
Well, Kenny loved it. So guys, buckle up.
Tumbleweeds week.
It's Kenny. Yeah. We have Emmy Potter on. She's a journalist. She's the best. I did a Sex and the City episode with her.
Guys, if you like episodes where Phil and I disagree, get excited for this one. I mean, this is about as contentious as Phil and I ever get over the course of a podcast.
We've gotten more contentious than this, right?
I don't think so.
If we got this contentious over Tumbleweeds, what does that say about us?
But we can withstand anything. But what? But what else?
We're in this together forever.
What else has been like near this?
Oh boy, I don't know. Nothing comes to mind off the top of my head. But listen, it is a contentious episode. Spoiler: we don't agree on this film.
Oh my god! I'm sorry. I just looked it up. I didn't realize it was Gavin O'Connor who directed it. Gavin O'Connor.
Neither did we before we saw it.
And he stars in it too.
Warrior, which is one of my favorite films. Yeah. It's a
great
movie that
better than Tumbleweeds.
Actually, yeah, for sure. But it's a movie that I feel like everybody should watch. I think it is a perfect film, and I'm kind of fascinated by that.
Tumbleweeds is
love
not
Warrior, and I also love The Way Back. And I think he's
I like that too.
Super fucking talented,
and is Pilot of the Americans.
And I love the Pilot of the Americans. but I think this is him figuring some shit out and
Yes.
figuring out a lot of things not to do moving forward.
Yeah, listen,
and we should
I'm
thank
not.
him for that if all the other good stuff came later.
But I don't think that that's the public perception of this movie. I think the public perception of this movie is this was a good start, if not a great start.
Was it kind of an indie darling?
Yes,
it was, and Janet
was.
McTeer got a nomination for Best Actress for it as
and
well.
People thought she was going to win. I mean, like this
it had an interest. It had a weird narrative around it. It's also kind of a forgotten movie in a way too. Like nominees for Best Actress in 1999. Two come to mind, obviously, very quickly. Which is Hilary Swank and Annette Bening. That was sort of the two, like, who's going to get it between them. And then maybe you'll remember Meryl Streep for Music of the Heart. But remembering. Anyway, yeah. So it's just an interesting thing.
Go. Can you name the fifth? We haven't done her yet. Big actress.
Who is it? Why am I drawing a blank?
Big actress, a movie that we haven't even discussed doing.
Are you kidding?
Oscar winner. For Best
we've
Actress. No, I mean, we'll do it. We're going to do it. But like, even when you and I talk about movies, like we'll just dump or whatever. We don't even talk about this one.
I'm drawing a complete blank.
All right. She's a big actress. She won a Best Actress movie subsequent to this. And she is also in another 1999 movie that we also haven't done, but very much on purpose.
Jacob the Liar.
No.
Oh,
very much on purpose because
wait.
Very much on purpose because we're saving it.
Oh, so it's not the other sister.
No. I mean, we're gonna do them all, but like there are a few that we're definitely saving, and this is one.
Why am I completely drawing a blank on this, Kenny?
Just tell you?
Yeah, just tell me.
Julianne Moore, Map of the World.
Oh, really? Like honestly, that I don't know why I didn't even like put two and two together. That's fucking crazy. Yeah, so there you go. But yeah, so I guess I'm wrong. The one that no one remembers apparently is Julianne Moore in Map of the World, but Janet McTeer is right behind her there. But yeah, so Tumbleweeds next week. You listen to Kenny and I get into the Tumbleweeds together, and with Emmy.
I got that.
And
Emmy was a great referee.
She was fantastic.
Yes.
She was on a Sex and the City episode.
She's a genius, and she's a gentle lady.
She's a gentle lady who recognized that somehow this was getting out of control.
Yes. guys.
What are we really arguing about here?
Guys.
But thank you, Toby.
What are we arguing about when we argue about
Oh my gosh, thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
You
love to have you on, Toby.
It's one of my favorite things, and I appreciate you having me back.
99 podcast like it. You want to